This is Moving Soulward, the podcast about growing a business at the intersection of strategy, spirituality, and self care. We're your hosts, Katie McLaughlin, your Be Good guide, and
Maria Spiralis, the lunar lawyer. We love a good inspirational story, but we're not interested in just profits or bottom lines. Though don't get us wrong, those things are important.
in Moving Soulward, expect to hear conversations with entrepreneurs who are at all different stages of building a business, with two important things in common. Success means something different to each of them, and you don't have to sell your soul to get what you want.
Prioritizing stillness, systems, energies, and service are all valuable and necessary parts of mindful entrepreneurship. Now grab your favorite card deck, a warm mug, spark up a candle, and listen in.
In this week's episode, instead of doing interview style, we're going to have a little conversation, Marie and I, about spiritual hygiene. And I'm really excited to dig into this topic, especially I know this has been a big topic of conversation lately with just the daylight savings time, Halloween, election, like just a lot of things disorienting us. I feel like spiritual hygiene is something that we can always be honing in on. Maria, how would you define spiritual hygiene?
I think spiritual hygiene, the first thing that came to mind was self care, but in such a different way. It's more about your energy to me than self-care is. Self-care is so broad to me. So spiritual hygiene is just both from a proactive and a reactive place, maintaining your energy, your auric field, whatever you want to call it, your bubble, despite what might be thrown at you. What about you? How would you define spiritual hygiene?
Yeah, I would agree that it's more than self-care. I think self-care is an aspect to it. I think self-care is sort of like the stepping stone into it, right? Like, I think that spiritual hygiene is the intentional rituals, practices, or methods that you use to maintain a sort of balance in your flow, in your energetic field, like you said, or in your just how you're feeling overall, like not just in your body or emotionally, like physically, emotionally, spiritually. It's spiritual hygiene, but like it to me it encompasses all of that, right? Like it's how if I were to measure like how my spiritual hygiene is working, I think I would do that by like several things. Like I would be like, how does my body feel today? How do I feel emotionally? Do I feel connected? Do I feel disconnected to myself, to my environment? Like it's a series of checks and balances within your whole, I don't know, internal system and how that's operating.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I would not a very succinct definition.
No, it makes sense though, and it's also okay, connection to the earth and connection to, source or the divine or whatever you wanna call it. It's like all of those things, so it's hard to keep it succinct.
Yeah, yeah, and I think maybe there's if I'm looking at it from, like, a measurable not that you can, like, scientifically measure how connected you're feeling to yourself, but if you're looking at things as, like, where am I on these different scales, then I would say maybe you could talk about spiritual hygiene as being, like, are you regulated, dysregulated? And is that, like that could be, you know, hormonally, that could be, again, emotionally, like, I see visually in my mind, I see, like, a series of sliding scales, and then I see the green area of where I know I feel good, and then on each of those scales, like, where am I at? And do I need to, what do I need to do to sort of bring myself back to being all in the green, no matter, which scale? If I had to, like, visually, um,
Yes.
describe it.
Yeah. It takes a certain amount of self-awareness too, like, "Oh, everything's pissing me off today.
Mhm.
There's probably something I need to step away and think through or, reground or whatever it is."
Yeah, I think physical is easier to sort of latch onto when it's so abundantly dysregulated. Like I was sick all last week, so I was like, okay, my body is definitely out of sync? What do I need to do to protect my vessel? And like, how is my space contributing to that? And you can sort of dig into it that way. But yeah, those emotional pings of like, okay, I have a very short fuse today, or I feel just like playful out of net. Like it can go sort of in either side of the scale. So I don't want to say that dysregulated is always like the negative side of the scale, because sometimes for me being dysregulated is the opposite side of if I am like, "Oh my god, I'm feeling so sociable," and so that is also not my normal green zone, right? Like, it's so then I'm looking at, okay, why am I over indexing on that area of my life? Was it because the pendulum was too far on the other side of the spectrum at one point and I'm swinging it, where do you find that balance? So, I think there's a lot of ways to like, approach understanding where you're at on each of those scales.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point. It doesn't dysregulated doesn't always have to mean, the negative. It can mean like over over indexed on good things.
Yes. Exactly, exactly. What are some rituals or practices that you participate in for your own regulation? Or I guess let's start with maybe an easier question is, what are you doing right now, like in the last couple weeks or months or whatever time frame feels right to you that you are like feels like it's helping you stay in that sort of green zone?
Mhm. Mhm. Yes, right now is the great clarifier because in the summer my answer would have been different.
Yeah.
I have always struggled with the grounding outside, especially if you live in Tennessee. I just have a bug thing, and so the summer is not like if I go outside and stand in the yard barefoot and get chigger bites, this is not my green space.
Yeah.
This is not my this is not contributing to my overall spiritual hygiene. Quite the opposite. But we are in October. No, we're not. We're in November. And in the morning, especially, the weather is amazing. So I can go outside and sit on my porch for half an hour barefoot and just like literally notice the clouds. What I'll usually do is I'll bring my mug of whatever and do a meditation from an app. I have a hard time, doing it without some kind of guidance. So usually do a guided meditation for 10 or 20 minutes and then just sit and literally look at the clouds. I've had a thing with the clouds lately and just noticing, they're moving, noticing their shape and the color. And it's just, it's just a noticing. And it's not necessarily like a body scan of how I'm feeling. It's just like kind of connecting to nature in a way. So that's been my religious daily practice for the last couple of weeks because now that I don't have to worry about mosquitoes, I can just sit outside and enjoy. And I think too, you probably feel the same way seasonally, whether it's actual seasons or life seasons or whatever, like different things will feel better. I had a big journaling season and I do some now, but not as much as I did maybe 6 months ago or card pulling or whatever. So it's like, it just comes in waves. How about you? What are your practices?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say it comes in waves for sure. I am a manifester, and so I cannot have the same thing every day. It's against my design. And sometimes I have really, multi-step morning rituals, and sometimes there's nothing on the morning ritual. I think now I'm sort of at this point where I am intentionally focusing on certain aspects that I want to get better at connecting with. And what I mean by that is I also went through a journaling phase, and that was really great. I still do it. It's great for like data keeping and looking back when I'm looking at astrological transits and being like, how do these certain transits make me feel so I can sort of understand my own flow. And I have lots of things in my toolkit that I can pull from. But to me, it's been more about building up what that intuitive hit of what do I need today and what do I need in this moment, I can spend a lot of time thinking in the future and have so many lists. You know this very well. But there's something about being able or building that muscle, that trust muscle with myself to be able to be like, but what do I need right now? And if what I need right now is to walk around the block, or what I need right now is a day of just like sitting on the couch with my dog, like then the list gets pushed. So it very much I feel like I'm integrating more of my spiritual hygiene and into those intuitive hits as regularly as I can and building up that muscle. So what that looks like or what that has been looking like the last week, I've been really trying to build up somatic exercises, having just a list that I can pick from or like a movement that I can pick from that I can when I wake up in the morning and I'm like, what do I need today? If movement comes into my mind, I'm trying to then take that slowly, right? So a what does that mean? Does that mean like a neck roll or some somatic exercise? That to me, movement, I would sort of like take that hit a little too aggressively before and be like, I've got to get on the Peloton. I've got to go. Like, I've got to like
Gotta be
do
full everything.
yeah, everything has to be on 100%, right? So now or the 5-gallon bucket, I love that reference of what's the 5-gallon bucket version and what's the teaspoon version. So now I'm trying to get out of those larger pendulum swings and into those sort of smaller shifts and be like, okay, I need movement. Let me do 15 minutes of somatic movement where I'm just connecting to myself, connecting to my breath. I'm getting like the crunchies out of my shoulders. Whatever that is, and then moving on with my day, right? Instead of trying to stack all of these things, which I used to be very good at doing in the morning, but then the rest of the day would sort of all go to shit and then back to reset in the morning. So now it's more about checking in with myself throughout the day and being and asking myself more like, what do I need? And so then what do I need right now could be I need to go stand outside. I need to do a card pull. I need to call a friend and chat with them. I need to, and it's starting to come together as a more holistic approach to like even seeing those levers, right? If I'm just asking myself in the morning and I'm like, okay, these three are dysregulated, let's go fix them, then I'm likely throwing something else out of whack. So that's been my approach lately, which is definitely very different than it ever has been before, but always changing.
Well, it's so simple, but so obvious, and I feel like I never think to stop and say, "What do I need today?" I just kinda, like, go into
It's
it. But
so hard for something
I
so simple. It's so hard to actually
yeah.
turn that into a practice.
Yes. Well, and I didn't know that with as a manifestor, the same thing every day would not is not what you want.
No, I can't. It is against my energy. Like if
I feel like there's something in in my chart in astrology that actually wants something to do with like day-to-day routines. I don't expect you to remember off the top of your head, but there's something in whatever that day-to-day routines house is that's like, "Oh, I need like ritual day to day
yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised.
normalcy."
It shows up in my astrology. It shows up in my birth chart as well. Saturn and Uranus are conjunct in my sixth house, which is that day to day routine, which basically means I build up new structures, then I tear them down, but like on a whim, sudden change, sudden, and it's coming from this like inner authority of I don't want to do that anymore. I'm done. On to the next.
Mhm. Um, so when you're kind of in that regular practice of asking yourself what you need, of whatever your body needs that day, do you notice a difference or have you noticed a difference on those times where you've been in that regular practice and that flow versus not? And what's kind of like your energetic default when you're in that flow?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, this is like a lot of the stuff that I am, like, passionate about figuring out, like, this shows up a lot in my work. I'm very into astrological timing, how my own timing, coincides with that, how my manifestor energy, shows up, how I move. in the most optimized way. Like my biggest, you know, evil is inefficiency. You can't create more time, and I want the time that I'm spending to be valuable and to feel like not necessarily good or bad. Like I'm not chasing like a forever happiness, but the being in flow feels so different than feeling not in flow. Feeling in flow, even if there's conflicts that are coming up, I feel like I am in that highest and best flow self. I There are like characteristics about myself that are like operating really well. One thing is I will be it's easier for me to go in and out of creative urges and rest. That transition feels very natural. I can very much be like, I'm going to create something. And then, okay, now I feel like that creation or I'm done with that energy, that output. Now I'm moving into rest. And there's no
Very manifester.
yeah, there's no but that transition isn't like a harsh one. It feels very like natural. It feels very like good and not like in a like I'm controlling the situation way, but just like, okay, and naturally now I'm over here. I think when conflicts show up when I'm in flow, I have an easier time being an observer of my emotions instead of just pure reaction to them. So being like, what is this emotion telling me? What is this conflict telling me? How does that work into my life? Because I'm in that just like I'm more energetically connected with my whole being and way of living. When I am out of flow, when I'm dysregulated, it just feels like everything is like a fight. Everything is like it's the opposite.
Hard.
You know, I love my lucky girl energy. It's the opposite. It's like unlucky girl energy. It just feels like that there's resistance. And what I used to think that sort of pushing through the resistance was like this good thing, right? That's how you get productive, that's how you get things done. That I have a completely different outlook on that now, where that resistance is telling me like this isn't what you should be doing right now, or this isn't like this you're forcing something that you don't need to force. And it could be and, like, what kind of resistance is it? Is it a no? Is it you shouldn't be doing this at all? Is it this a not right now? This is not for you right now? Or is this a this is for someone else? You're experiencing resistance because it's not actually something you're supposed to be doing. You're like, you should have delegated or you should be it's not even for your own life path or whatever. So the feeling is different. And now, I mean, I'm like, as someone who goes down the rabbit hole on things, this is something now that I monitor really closely, just day to day. It helps me ask myself, what do you need right now? But I'm monitoring that. I'm like, where am I feeling dysregulated? Where do I feel anger is an amazing indicator. I don't get angry often. I don't get frustrated often. If I'm angry or frustrated, I'm like, it's not the thing that I'm frustrated at or angry at that is the issue. That is the ultimate sign of this is not in alignment. Something with this isn't working, whether it's like a particular way that I'm working, something that I'm doing, someone I'm interacting with, something I'm like, it's there's something there that like needs to be evaluated. And the opposite, and this shows up in in my human design as well. When I'm in flow, I feel peace. I just feel like I said, it's not that overabundant like happiness. Let's get it. It's like no, everything's just peaceful and, like, calm and yeah.
Yeah. Is there a thing that you know either as it's happening or something that you've noticed that's like, "Oh, this is gonna derail me or throw me off?"
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of deprogramming from corporate America, hustle culture, productivity stuff, but, always a work in progress. I try to be good about not overextending myself, still do it. When I can see that I have a lot of stuff coming up as like socially, I need alone time to rest, recover, like energetically, like build my battery back up. And so if I have a house guest for a whole week, like that, just that is I have to do more work to make sure that I am staying spiritually aligned and that I'm bumping up that hygiene. If I'm not in my space, which I have specifically curated to be my beautiful little cocoon, if I'm going home for the holidays, like it's not just the dynamics with family or that like I'm eating different things. That is like a whole perfect storm of here I have to systematically be like, what do I need to do to stay regulated? But just being in a different space, being in a different environment and not having like my immediate things, even though I'm not doing a specific ritual or routine every day, I very much reach for things consistently, right? When I'm dysregulated. And if they're not there,
Mhm.
then that's a problem.
Mhm. Mhm. So how do you rebound when those things happen?
I think it's kind of like you were saying earlier, right? Like it's that having things in your tool belt when you need to be reactive, but it's way more helpful to be proactive. So if I know that I'm coming up, and again, I'm still not perfect at this. Again, I was sick for a whole week last week. So dysregulation still definitely happens. But knowing if I have a lot of stuff coming up all around the same time, if I'm going to be home, like I'm going to be out of the country for 2 weeks next year. So, what do I need to do now to make sure that I have those tools to reset wherever I am in whatever situation I'm doing? And giving myself that time to readjust because it's not like I can only find flow in my house, in my little bubble. It's like, what do I need to access when I'm somewhere else? And then building
Mm.
up that skill set for myself.
Yeah, that's where the proactive stuff is so important.
Mhm. So I'm curious for you, how do you stay energetically balanced when dealing with conflict, especially like in a law practice? Like I mean, talk about disruption. Your career path is like kind of has that built in.
It does. It definitely does. And it is a work in progress to not take on my client's energy when stuff like that happens, to take on the energy of the opposing counsel. So I've had to cut a lot from what I'm willing to do. Before I started my practice in 2015, I worked at a law firm and we did litigation, and it was so like working until 11:30 at night and fighting your client's fight and just like getting angry. And I knew that I didn't want to do litigation anymore when I started my own practice, but there's been this just kind of this slow evolution of like, well, I still have to do, this kind of work because otherwise no one will want to work with me, or lawyers have to handle like business divorces or whatever. And it's like, no, you don't. You don't have to do anything. It sounds very wise, doesn't it? I just came to this
Mhm.
realization 2 months ago. This is only 2 months fresh. But it's knowing as soon as I get that email of, "Hey, here's the scenario. So and so said you could help me," and just being like, "Nope, I can't." Like, the money would be nice, but it is so not worth the toll and the energetic blanket that comes over me when I have to engage with an attorney who's just completely unreasonable on other side, or emotions from a client who's like, say this and say this and say this. And I'm like, no, I can't do it in this stage of my life, in this season, so to speak. So it has a lot to do with saying no in order to stay energetically balanced.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can't imagine like I mean, I could never be a like in litigation all day or even a therapist where you're taking on a lot like you're just absorbing so much of other people's energy. It's a lot to sort of then rebalance that out. So but one thing I think that's interesting is I was like envisioning a parallel between what you were just talking about and how you were talking about sort of the reactive and proactive side of spiritual hygiene. And it seems like now you're shifting more to being proactive to help your clients energetically. So instead of the like, you have a disagreement or you have something that you need legal help with because of a conflict, you're like, let me help you build the tools to be proactive so that your energy is protected throughout. Like, is there a parallel there that you see between like how you're approaching your work and then how you approach your own spiritual hygiene?
That is so interesting. Yes. I mean, also like my own personal health being proactive. It's all I thrive in the especially work-wise, like the proactive space. And if I've helped you to be proactive and I know that these contracts are in place and I know that we've protected your stuff, then actually if that conflict happens, I'm less likely to say no because I know all of those building blocks are there. So I know that the conflict is going to be a little bit softer and easier to handle as opposed to like someone wrote their own contract and didn't do all of the basic proactive things that should have been done and then oh my god this is happening and can you help me? It's like oof this is a lot. This is
Mhm.
energetically a lot, and we weren't proactive here. So there's definitely parallels to energetic hygiene, to health, to to where I like to live in terms of my work on that proactive side.
Yeah, for sure. I also think like there's I don't know, I can see it in your work and your shift and, working with you over the past year is like of that same like that deprogramming from what your career should look like to like what you want it to look like and that shift from reactive to proactive and I've seen that in myself as well of like I don't want to live in just a reactive state at all times. I want to be proactive in how I'm approaching things with myself, with my clients, with how I'm living. And so that feels like a whole nother podcast episode that we could draw parallels there. I feel like there's something to that that we need to riff on further. But one of the things that I wanted to ask about is if you balance a lot of hats. So do you do things that are specifically to keep that energy balanced that like for your career specifically versus being a mom versus being a sister, different family dynamics? Or is it, do you look at it sort of like, here's all the things that I do to just keep myself balanced?
I think that's a great question. It kind of feels like more of the latter, but it's a matter of because my activity, my practice doesn't really change, but really only recently it was like I was gonna go and meditate, and I was like, "Well, it's Saturday." It's one thing when it's a work day and nobody's around, and I have all the time in the world, but, like, everybody's inside, and I don't know if I should leave my boys and to do it, but I absolutely should do it. Not only because, yes, it's not a work day, but I have other bodies and beings to tend to and other responsibilities, but also because it's an example to them also of, like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is what hygiene looks like. This is what, calming your body down, as I tell my kids, keeping your body calm, looks like. And so that was a shift for me in terms of spiritual hygiene, energetic hygiene, getting grounded, etc. Is like, oh, it doesn't have to just be for work days. Like this is life. And there will be non-work things that trigger me or throw me off balance that, I need to stay proactive for.
Yeah, 100%. Other than meditation, what do you do to reset your energy? Like if you need that quick reset, you get an email midday and you're like, you feel that wave
Yep.
of like, "Ooh, dysregulation."
Yep. That's a really good question. I will stew for a minute, but I also one of the best things that, we ever did in my house was get a treadmill as, like, a joint Christmas present. Because we live on a weird street with a hill, and it's not a super walkable area, but I can literally get on the treadmill and just walk for 10 minutes, and that makes the hugest difference, and you think, kind of like you said, it either has to be, like,
Mhm.
100% or nothing. No, you can walk in a normal pace for 10 minutes, and it just kind of, like, recycles things a little bit.
Mhm. 100%. I mean, like, any movement to get you into your body and out of your mind, I feel like is always a good regulation, but it's Yeah, it took me it's so interesting that it took me so long to realize that, like, that didn't mean you have to do an hour hit workout midday, like,
Yes.
to feel
Yes.
connected. Well,
Totally.
I mean, this has been, like, such a good conversation. I feel like we should do more of these just riffing on things, but I wanna leave the our audience with maybe one thing from each of us, and I'll let you go first, of, like, what's maybe one thing in the last 6 months that has been surprisingly, like, a small thing, but a big shift in just, like, your overall hygiene?
Ooh.
And maybe it's the treadmill,
A sm
but
a small thing, but a big shift in my overall hygiene. You know what the first thing that comes to mind is coffee dependence, which I try not to micromanage now, but I was every day drinking coffee, and I was like, "It's just fun," or maybe 2, and my energetic normal state is anxiety. I run on anxiety pretty well. I do a good job of that. And I can tell a dramatic difference on days that I have coffee and days that I don't. And I love coffee. I mean, I grew up, my parents have a coffee company. Like I literally grew up on coffee, not on it, but around it. And so I'm not at all anti-coffee, but I stopped having it every day probably about 6 or 8 months ago. And it makes a tremendous difference in my energy and in my day.
I love that. I am very caffeine sensitive, so I feel that. I
What about
think
you?
I think my one small thing I think I have so many, I feel like small things that I've implemented, but if I would say, and you've heard me talk about this before, but if I could say the one thing is I call it little luxuries.
Mhm.
So building in moments of like joy and presence and like beauty and just in the smallest ways, but like where it can show up with not a lot of work and like be a little happy accident in my daily life. So things like, I set up, like, speaking of coffee, a little, like, coffee tea station, and it feels like I'm maybe staying at an Airbnb, not at my house, and I have my little supplements over there and my trace minerals, and, like, it feels very, I don't know, like, luxury to be able to pick out, like, a cute mug and get my nice coffee or tea and, like, put it together, and it is, like, a small moment in my day, but when I'm doing that in a lot of different ways, like lighting a nice scented candle or using a like really great pen that just feels good. Like they're little things that like bring me so much joy and then they help me stay in that present moment. So that I'm reminded, oh damn, this pen feels so good when it writes and I'm like, "Oh, what do I need right now?" Like it connects me somehow to my body. So, it's sort of like my one of my mantras, one of my ways of life, and I'm continuously looking for little things that I can add in those little luxuries too, whenever I can.
I remember you mentioning this at one of your astrology events, like, "What little corner of your house can you make feel like a resort?" And I was like, "Ah," I went home and did it immediately because it makes a huge difference.
Mhm. But what can you do where your environment tells back to you that, like, you're taking care of taking care of yourself? It's like your
Yeah.
current self taking care of your future self. Again, efficiency, I love it.
Yes. You are efficiency.
It's working. Okay, well, this
Well, this
has
has been a
been
great chat. Great chatting with you.
and, we'll see each other next week.
We hope you loved that conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review this episode. We appreciate it so much, and we will see you next time.